Okay, before calling our API endpoint using our Angular app, I just want to quickly highlight something here about this node application. So note that here, we're requiring the CORS module. CORS stands for Cross-Origin Resource Sharing, and we're adding this to our middleware. What is this for? Well, you know that our node server is running on localhost port 8080, but our Angular app is on port 4200. So this is like an application that is hosted on domain A that is trying to access a resource on a different domain using an AJAX request. And by default, browsers prevent this for security reasons. Now, the explanation of this is beyond the scope of this course, but what I want to point out here is that I have explicitly added this line here to enable CORS or cross-origin resource sharing. This line does not exist in the sample code that you see on Auth0 website. So without this, you cannot call this endpoint from our Angular app. Now in the future, when I show you how to integrate an Angular app and a Node.js app, you will learn how to host them on the same domain, so we won't have this problem. All right, now let's move on to the client part. So we go back to our management dashboard, and on the client's page, we go to our Pepper app. Now scroll down. Towards the end, you will see Show Advanced Settings. And then on the OAuth tab, here we can select the algorithm for signing our JSON Web Tokens. By default, this is set to HS256, which uses symmetric encryption. But as you remember in the last lecture, when creating an API, we use RS256 algorithm. So here we need to change this to RS256. Otherwise, the client and the API cannot understand the same token. So, save changes. Now back in our Angular app, I'm going to go to app.component.html, simply duplicate one of these buttons here, and change the label to call API. Just like before. Now, let's go to app.component and add this method here. Now, inside this method, I'm going to use auth HTTP to call this API endpoint. Localhost port 8080/authorized. So as you learned before, this auth HTTP service will look at our local storage. It will find an item with the key ID underline token, and then it will add this to the request header. Now let's subscribe to this observable. Get the response and simply log it on the console. Now, in order for this to work, we need to add a small configuration to our auth lock object. So let's go to auth service. This is where we create our lock object. So as you remember, here we have the client ID, the domain, and a configuration object. Now, previously we used this field, additional sign-up fields, but in this lecture we don't need it. So I'm going to delete this. So in our configuration object, which is the third argument to the constructor of auth0log, I'm going to add a new key, auth. Here we're going to set additional parameters. So we set params to an object, and then add audience and set it to https api.pepper.com. So we are using the same audience both on the client and on the server. If you don't add this to the client, you cannot call the server. You will get an error. Now let's test this. Okay, now in the browser, I'm going to log in. If you're already logged in, be sure to log out first because there is some problem with this code, and I'm going to show you how to fix this in a second. So when we log in, we get this login widget, but our login doesn't work. Now, if you look at the console, you see an error like this. JWT must have 3 parts. What's happening here? Let's go back to our authorization service. Here in the constructor, when handling the authenticated event, I'm going to log this auth result object in the console. Let's see what we're getting from the server. Save. Back to the browser. Now we need to open Chrome Developer Tools. Go in the Application tab. In local storage, look, we have an item with the key ID underlying token, but the value is undefined. And that's why we got that error, because this is not a valid JSON Web Token. So I'm going to delete this first. And then back here, refresh the page. Okay, now let's log in. Okay, the login is still not working, but let's take a look at the console. So this is the object that we get when the user logs in. Note that access token has a value, but ID token is undefined. This happened because of this configuration when creating our lock object. Now, unfortunately, at the time of recording this video, Auth0 documentation is not updated, so I'm not entirely sure what is happening behind the scene. But the effect is that when you set this audience parameter here, instead of getting ID token, you get access token. And this means in the constructor of our auth service, here, instead of storing ID token in local storage, we need to store access token. But we leave the key as is, ID underlying token. Also, as you might expect, this get profile will not work because ID token is undefined. So instead, we're going to use a different function called get user info. And by the way, get profile is going to be deprecated soon. So at the time you're watching this video, chances are get profile does not exist anymore. Now, get user info works with an access token. So we change this to access token as well. And this will get rid of the error that you saw. However, we need to go back to index.html. Earlier at the beginning of this section, we added a reference to this lock library. Now, this is version 10.6, and this version does not have get user info method. So we need to upgrade this to 10.7. Now let's make sure that everything works. So back to Chrome. First, we go to Application tab. Remove this item. Refresh the page. Log in again. Okay, beautiful. Now here's the console. Call API. Beautiful, that's working. Also, let's call show profile. We get the profile as well. However, this profile object, as you see, has only one property, which is our user ID. What happened to other properties? This is because we used get user info method here. To get additional properties about the user, we need to go back to the configuration of our lock object. In the params, add another key, scope. So here we need to set this to OpenID and profile. And this will return additional properties about the user's profile. So this get user info method looks at the scopes that we set while creating our lock object. Save, back to the browser. We need to log out first because we need to read the profile one more time. Okay, show profile. And now you see additional properties about the user. Now I need to clarify that Auth0 is still under development. So this whole get user info and working with APIs is not officially published. So chances are, at the time you watch this video, there are some changes. So I'll try to update this video as soon as there are major changes.